Welcome to Voices of Women. I'm your host, Chris Stanis, and the founder of Women of Wisdom, which has been around since 1993 in Seattle, Washington. We're having our 29th annual WOW conference. It's March 11th through the 14th in 2021. It's online for the very first time, which we're very excited about. Our theme this year is Celebrating Spirit of Women, United We Are One. Our special guests this year include the well-known author Terry Tempest Williams and the storyteller, the amazing Louisa Tiche. You can read all about it at www.womenofwisdom.org. Today, I'm interviewing one of our newest presenters. She's new this year, Vernelle Nelson. Vernelle had an eclectic career in radio, television, nonprofit organizations, and government service. Shortly after publishing her first two books, Reverend Vernelle pursued her calling to become a Unity minister and was ordained in 2016. She established the Unity Golden Life Ministries, best known for seaside morning meditations in Florida. The most important work of her ministry, however, is providing pastoral care for the homebound, hospital visitations, and spiritual support for hospice patients in their circle of care. Reverend Vernelle facilitates A Course in Miracles and with a Unity twist each Wednesday evening via Zoom, and is a faculty member of the Unity Urban Ministerial School, where she is president of the UUMS Alumni Association. Vernelle is the author of several books: Favorable Conditions, Don't Invite Me to Your Pity Party, Living a Golden Life, and most recently, Don't Ever Invite Me to Another Pity Party. Vernelle will be giving a workshop at WOW, and the title is Celebrate Yourself, Living a Golden Life. That will be Friday morning on March 12th. So welcome, Vernelle. I'm so glad to have you at this year's conference.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the conference.
Yes, I am too. It's very exciting to be doing this online. We know we can reach a lot more people that haven't been able to travel to Seattle, and so we're looking for a very national and international audience. So we're very excited. So first, I'd like for you to share about what was your calling to become a Unity minister?
Well, it was something deep, deep down inside. It wasn't anything like a thunderbolt or, a lightning bolt rather, or anything like that. But I just had this feeling, this gut feeling that the ministry was where I was supposed to be. Pastoral care was my calling more than anything else. In my, I guess in my 20s, when I was there with family members, when one of my grandmother's sisters made her transition, I recognized that I had been blessed with the capability to be a calming presence for my grandmother at that time. And I don't know, it was just something deep inside that just let me know that there was more work for me to do in that area. And of course, I was a single mom. I had a career going, and just it didn't make sense to me at that time to let go of everything and go into hospice care and that kind of work as a chaplain or giving support in whatever way. And so I waited until I got to the point where I like to call myself semi-retired. And I pursued the calling to provide pastoral care. And for me, it is very fulfilling. I know with a lot of people, they have challenges when they hear that I do a lot of work with hospice patients in their circle of care. And I let them know that it's not really a serious challenge for me, because when I meet these people, I already know that they are in the process of releasing their bodies. So it is relatively easy for me to be there, be objective and neutral and supportive of the patient's family, friends, loved ones, and caregivers.
Yeah, that's so important work. And, giving the growing probably a number of people, baby boomers are coming to that age, and we're dealing with our elders, who are needing that kind of care. I'm sure it's very valuable for so many people. So I'm So, and that really shows how your ministry is different, because you're not affiliated with a specific church like a lot of ministers are, but you've created your own ministry
Yes.
that
Yes.
fits you, and that's
Yes.
wonderful.
And we
So
are fully sanctioned and authorized and a part of Unity Worldwide Ministries.
that's
So we're
great.
not just out there on our own. We are
Drifting away.
a member we are a member of Unity Worldwide Ministries. We are one of the member ministries.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. So I would like to discuss with you your thoughts on our theme. What does it mean to celebrate spirit of women? United we are one, which so much fits in the work you do and your book. And your subject at the conference is Celebrate Yourself, Living a Golden Life. So let's talk about that. Why should women celebrate themselves? What is this? What does it mean to you? And how does this unite us as one?
Well, let's face it, women for eons have been conditioned to be nurturers, to care for other people, to give up and sacrifice. And that's not what we're about. In indigenous cultures around the world, centuries ago, women were the leaders. Women were the ones who basically were the heads of households. And in time, largely because of brute force and the fact that the male of the species had more physical strength and was usually larger, the women became subdued. Women's were their rights were taken away from them, their leadership roles were taken from them, and that's not our truth. Our truth is that we are so much more than nurturers, so much more than caregivers, so much more than the ones who take care of cleaning the house and cooking the meals, and definitely not subservient. And so this is why I really created this workshop called Celebrate Yourself. I use my own book, Living a Golden Life, and Eric Butterworth's book, Celebrate Yourself, to bring out our truth, to understand that regardless of what other people, society, parents, teachers even label us with, whatever they tell us we are, that is not who we are. Who we are is our innate nature. And this workshop really helps people get back into themselves and discover who they are. It's only like a short period of time, so we can't get deep, 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 but we go as deep as we possibly can in that short period of time. And while we're doing it, we're having a lot of fun. There's a lot of music, there's interaction, we've got small groups. It's fun filled, jam packed, and everybody who walks away from it has a different attitude about themselves.
Yes, and that's the experience at all our workshops. It's actually a place where women, we create a safe container that women can share their stories. And so they're
Yes.
witnessed and validated and witness, and you get to witness other people, and you hear stories that you've been scared to share about yourself, and you go, oh, there's somebody else who feels this way, who's gone through this. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
we're not so alone, we're not so isolated, and that's
Right.
very healing. So it's been a very healing aspect of Women of Wisdom. And
Mm-hmm.
when we're in person, we do 3 hours. We're not doing it online because of this thing called Zoom fatigue, but so we have 2 hours and we have good breaks in between. So
Okay.
yeah, the experiential part is so important, and we're building that into the Zoom calls. There will be
Good.
one-on-one and small groups and all sorts of
Good.
fun things. It sounds like you're going to create that. So let's talk about you. Who are the women who influenced you to celebrate your own self? You probably have some mentors.
Yeah. Well, first of all, my grandmothers, both of them. My paternal grandmother was always there with words of wisdom, with life lessons, life instructions. And so was my maternal grandmother. Both of them had that gift. And my mother's mom, I really admire her. She was a highly intelligent woman, but because of the situation in which she was born, her parents were young when the slaves were emancipated. Her mother, I believe my grandmother said her mother was like 7 or 8. Her father was in his teens. He was older, but they had that experience of um, being enslaved. And my great grandparents were able, when my grandmother was very, very young, to purchase 60 acres of land in southern Maryland, which, was kind of interesting back then in the early 20th century because of the conditions of her birth and the life that she was living. My grandmother was only allowed to go to school up to the 6th grade. That was all any African American child was afforded in the early 20th century. And rather than just give up and accept that, because the powers that be in Charles County, Maryland, figured that a 6th grade education was all anybody needed to be a field hand or a domestic worker or something like that. So my grandmother took it upon herself to continue to go to school, even though she was just repeating the 6th grade over and over again. She wound up helping the teachers. And later in life, after she got married and was raising 5 children, she risked her life walking dark country roads, enlisting people to join the NAACP, registering people to vote. My entire life, I observed her being extremely active in the community and being a community leader. And in later years, I came to remember that she also provided a lot of hospice care for people. So I guess that's where I get it from.
Mhm.
And I didn't think about that when I started doing this work on a larger scale than just being with family members, nearing the end of life. Because I'm blessed to have been there with both my parents as they went through that process of transition. But I remembered actually in a conversation with another family member that my grandmother would literally leave her home and go sit with a friend or a neighbor who was transitioning. And she would come back and tell us about it. And like I said, I never thought about it because that was so many years ago. But yeah, my grandmothers and one teacher that I had when I was in elementary school, and I was lucky enough I actually had her for 2 years in a row, not because I repeated the grade, but because she taught those 2 grades consecutively. And she just was a spark of life. She was the first person who I remember saying they had been to Hawaii. And I was in elementary school, like I said, and I was so impressed because she came back with a fresh pineapple that she shared with everyone in the class. And back then, we didn't have the kind of refrigeration that we have now. So fresh pineapple was just incredible, an incredible treat. We had canned pineapple, but that's nothing like the fresh pineapple. And she really impressed me. She did. She did. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to have that heritage from your grandmothers and mother and to have that influence. So many people don't, or don't remember, or don't think about what was passed on to them, or the stories.
Yeah.
It's important that we continue our stories, that these legacies are shared, and it's wonderful that you're
Definitely.
sharing it with us. So
Yeah.
what,
And I
if there's
gotta
anything,
add too, I'm sorry, I gotta add too that my mother was also an influence because like I said, she was raised in that situation in rural Southern Maryland. By then, they did have high school for African American kids, but she wanted more. And it was unheard of in the 1940s, but she decided that she wanted to be a secretary. And she left Southern Maryland, went to secretarial school in Baltimore, and wound up working for the federal government. And she worked for the federal government her entire career. And she started as a secretary and she ended up at the Department of Education. And she was, I don't remember the exact title, but she was some kind of education specialist.
oh, that's great. So, any little hint to what people could expect when they attend your workshop? You kind of shared there's, music and all sorts of fun things, but what will they leave with?
Well, they will leave with the beginnings of a new self-identity. Like I said, that's something that is going to take more than the 2 hours that we have to really get rooted in your psyche and in your being. But you will leave with the beginnings of a new identity and the tools with which to really solidify that identity. Claim your truth. Know who you truly are, not who the world says you are, but who you truly are in your essence.
Well, and you know, I'm thinking that that can happen, be important for a woman at any age, that we all go through these transitions
Oh,
and we all
yes.
evaluate, like, who am I now, or who do I want to
Yes.
be moving forward? And, you know, life keeps changing and we have to move with those changes and look at, well, what
Yes.
do I want to evolve into now? What's my next
Yeah.
stage? What's my next steps?
That does evolve. And that's another thing that you don't want to ever lose sight of. You want to always make sure that in your groundedness, your identity is always not just what you do, but your true identity is who you are in your heart. Who you are in your heart does not really change. You know, as you said during the introduction, I've had a lot of different jobs. I've had several different careers, even. And I realize that the common thread in all that I've done is that I made life better for other people in one way or another. My very first job, aside from babysitting, was working part time during my senior year in high school at Peace Corps headquarters in Washington, D.C. And I went from there to the Agency for International Development. And I worked there while I was in school, and I was married and my son was born. So I stopped the work for a while so I could finish school. But every position I had, my first position out of college was teaching. So, like I said, everything I've had, that common thread is I help make life better for others. And when we really stop and think about the essence of who we are, you will find a common thread in almost everything that you've done to help identify your essence.
So true. Well, I want to move on to something else that we have added to our conference this year. We've done it before, but many, many years ago, and it came up, well, a lot of it came up because what happened with the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement and all that, that we wanted to get together women to talk about these subjects. So we have three different panels of interest, of topics of interest for women, and one of them is that you're going to be on. It's called Heart-Centered Activism: The Power of Women to Create Racial Equity. So we're bringing together several women from different ethnicities, and it's going to be a very dynamic panel and interesting discussion, which is also going to allow people to go into breakout rooms and discuss things as well. So one of the things, like for the aspect of you being on that panel, we're now learning that every Black person has a story of discrimination. I mean,
Yes.
I've been listening to a lot of panels, of educating myself, and then I was wondering what you are willing to share with our audience today that would help us understand how life is for you in regards of living as a Black woman in our um, this racist, systemic racism that we live in.
Well, being Black in America is an adventure. That's to say the very, very least. I have in my years been exposed to both covert and overt um, racism. Of course, I think, probably the first time a white person called me the N word, I was actually in a suburb of Washington, D.C., and I was driving down the street, and it was an area with which I was not truly familiar. So I was driving a little bit slowly so that I could get my bearings and make sure that I made the right exit. And this car full of teenagers just drove by and just shouted out the window. And it rattled me I wasn't expecting it, of course. Um, but of course, I got over it, but it stuck with me for a very long time. And I was in my 20s. Um, Now, a few decades later, it still happens, and it happens most times now. I gotta say, it's subtle. You go in a nice restaurant, and they'll place you at a table near the kitchen or near the restrooms, or you go in a store, and I'm sure you've heard this story before, in a department store or boutique or whatever, and you're shopping and you're just browsing, and you notice people are following you in the store to see if you're
Yeah.
going to shoplift. Um, Certain grocery stores in certain areas, chain grocery stores, supermarkets, whatever you want to call them, um, the better food is not in predominantly minority neighborhoods. And I'm saying minority because it's not just Black people. It's especially down here in South Florida where I live. It's
Right.
Haitians, Bahamians, Hispanics, whatever. Wherever there is a minority of Caucasians, you have poorer quality of merchandise. I was amazed. My granddaughter actually lives in Boca Raton, which is, a little shishi town. um, and I don't even remember what it was I wanted. I just ran into a dollar store. The merchandise in that particular dollar store was amazing. It's a chain. I'm not going to say which one, but just as a comparison, when I got back home, and I live in a very nice, diverse community. But when I got back home and I went to the dollar store, the same chain closest to my home, there was nothing close to what I experienced and saw in that dollar store in Boca Raton. Very interesting. Boca Raton is, like I said, it's a very, very wealthy community. Um, I remember when a few years back I had an older car, a Mercury Grand Marquis to be exact, and people were turning around looking at me in my car because everybody else was driving Lincolns and Benzes and Maseratis and Bentleys, and I'm driving a Mercury. So I stood out like a sore thumb. That that you get that a lot. You get a lot of looks. When you go into places where there's not a lot of Black people. I
Mhm.
don't get it too much, not too much, but it does happen here in South Florida because South Florida, like I said, is a diverse and progressive community. And I'll tell you what else I have observed by having lived in Florida now for 25 years. When I go back to Washington, D.C., which people don't recognize is south of the Mason-Dixon line,
Mhm.
um, still a lot of segregation in Washington area. A lot of segregation, not sanctioned by law, but just communities isolating themselves, Black and white. And it's very interesting, very, very interesting to observe, and sometimes painful to watch. I wasn't there. I didn't witness it, but I got from an extremely reliable source in Washington, D.C. Like I said, it's still largely segregated. However, um, I call them the pilgrims, the people who are coming in with the gentrification and all of that business. Um, there's a street in Washington called U Street Northwest. Had been basically Black Mecca for way, way, way before my parents were even born, probably before my grandparents were born. And now it's mostly white. And I was told that the friend of my nephew, one of his friends, was going there to meet someone on U Street. They've got a lot of they've always had a lot of nice restaurants and clubs and bars and theaters and things of that nature. And this kid parked his car, and a white cop literally, literally ran up to him and told him that he had not parked correctly. He was like a little bit over the line. And the cop just kept threatening him and said, I'm going to F you up. I'm going to F you up. So finally, this was a man in his middle 20s, I think, by that time. He was so intimidated, he just got in his car and left. And I'm sorry, that's just wrong. This is something that happened within the last 4 or 5 years in the nation's capital.
Yes, I've heard stories like that too in other cities.
Yes.
Yeah, it is shocking, and it's very unfortunate, and it's it's kind of mind-boggling, and
It's
I
beyond that, it's criminal.
right.
It is
Yeah.
criminal. And my personal feeling is that anyone who attempts to intimidate any other person should be charged and prosecuted, especially if they're going to do it on the basis of race or sexuality and all of the other ethnicities and things that fall into that category.
Yeah, and it's interesting, so much more is being exposed because of our everybody's carrying phones,
Thank God
cameras,
for
and
that.
recording things, and that's
Yes,
and I
yes,
think what's
yes,
going on is and very needed is exposing. That's how things get
definitely.
healed, because it's like you said, the subtle things have been it's been very hidden, and
Yes.
we need to hear these stories,
Mhm.
witness these things, and then do what we can about them. Um,
Definitely.
Now, do you do any work in racial equity? I mean, I would imagine you do in the work that you do.
Well, I belong to a group called Jam and All. It's Jews and Muslims and all others. And it's an interfaith group, clearly. We do things in the community to help educate people, to let folks know that, because it is an interfaith group, there is only one God. We all worship God, the same God. We may worship God differently, but the basic lessons are the same across the board. And it's not about extremism. It's not about hating one group. It's not about vilifying a group. It's not about feeling that the way you practice your faith is better than someone else's faith practice or faith walk. And we're all inclusive, you know. And that's the part that I do in term the work that I do in terms of racial equity and justice. Just this last couple of months, and the last session is actually going to be this coming Monday evening, December 14th. Jam and I had a 3-part series on racism and the Abrahamic religions. And the first session was on racism and Judaism. The second session, for which I was keynote speaker, was on racism and Christianity. And of course, I talked about some of my personal experiences, as well as the history of Christianity and the racism of Christianity in the United States specifically. And then on December 14th, the final session is going to be on racism and Islam. And I'm really anxious to listen to that one and be a part of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's all educational for us, and we don't think about it, but some of these
Yeah.
things go way back.
Oh, they do, yes.
And we're learning that. I think the important thing now is to educate ourselves, and I've
Definitely.
been putting out in the Women of Wisdom newsletter just all sorts of resources, things to read, things to watch,
Hmm.
and we titled this about the power of women to create racial equity. So
Yes.
I'm curious, for you, what you think women's role is. How can we be allies to stop to work? I don't know. Stop may be kind of a hard word to think we can actually stop it, but how do we change our systemic racism that we're living in? How do we move forward to heal that, to make changes?
women have always been a part of the movement to improve conditions for minorities in this country, all the way back to Harriet Tubman's Sojourner Truth, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Viola Liuzzo. She was a white woman from, I think, Detroit, lost her life as a freedom rider down in, I believe it was Mississippi or Alabama, I'm not sure, in the 60s. And the women continue to be a major part of this movement. And I'm not just talking about Kamala Harris. I'm talking about people like Susan Rice, who are in their own way breaking down barriers, kicking doors open. And every last one of us individually has an obligation to stand up for truth. When you hear something that is wrong, and I mean, let's face
Mhm.
it, white women have an opportunity that those of us of color don't have, because they can definitely be are in circumstances and situations where they hear conversations that are degrading to all minorities or any minority or any group of people, to stand up and speak the truth. That's how you do it. That's how you start it. You challenge them right there on the spot. Um, and I don't mind saying, so in the 60s, I went on a couple of protest marches and freedom rides, and definitely get out there and do that. I was so proud of two young women in my family who make great strides. One very young girl, I think she might be 13 or 14, was interviewed at Black Lives Matter Plaza by a German reporter. And of course, it was translated and everything. And she spoke so eloquently, so eloquently. I mean, it really gives me a lot of hope for the future. And then there's another young woman in my family who, she's older. I think she's in her 30s now. Um, she was a delegate at the Democratic National Convention. You don't have to be a delegate at a political convention to get involved in your community at the political, get involved in politics in your community, at the community level. Get involved with your school board. When you are involved and you speak the truth of our oneness, when you speak the truth that there is no difference except the outer, but deep down inside, everybody is the same. Deep down inside, everybody wants the same thing. When you put yourself in positions where you can speak to and influence politicians, local elected officials, school board members, teachers, even get involved with your PTA. If you have children, if you don't have children, you can still get involved with the schools as a mentor. They always need extra help. And as you're doing those things, whatever it is that you've been called to do in your heart, make sure that you stand up for justice for everybody, for equal rights for everybody, and for equal treatment for everybody, especially in school systems. Especially in school systems. One of the nonprofit organizations that I worked with was a legal aid office. And there was one of the projects that we had was for school children who were basically being channeled into that pipeline to go from school to prison, and establishing intervention programs. Get involved with those things. Be a guardian ad litem through the court system. There's a lot of things that we can do that don't really take a whole lot of our time to make a difference in our communities.
Yeah, so true. And I think one of the things, sometimes we think this is so overwhelming. There's so much to do. What can me as one person? But it's finding your passion, what interests you. Go there, work on one thing, work in
Yes,
schools, go to
yes,
city council meeting, whatever is available, whatever calls you, do
yes,
one thing.
yes.
We can't do
Get
it all, but if
involved.
all of us do one thing,
One thing, yes, yes,
take one step forward, and someday we'll get there. And I'm very encouraged by the younger generation too.
yes,
We're having some younger people on in our panels. We have an intergenerational panel and we have a community panel. And
Oh,
it's
cool.
very interesting to see these teens and 20-year-olds and what they're doing. It gives hope for the future.
Yes, definitely.
So what would you love the listeners to walk away from our talk today with? What last message do you have for them?
Oh, today, I'd like for the people who are listening and watching today to get really excited about this Women of Wisdom conference coming up in March. Register and come on out, come out virtually and just be a part of this. I am really excited about it. I'm looking forward to it. And I know in the bottom of my heart that whoever registers for this, whoever participates in these workshops and these seminars and these panel discussions, you're going to walk away a brand new person. You're going to walk away with all kinds of wonderful ideas. You're going to walk away with feeling just wonderful about yourself, feeling wonderful about who you are, feeling wonderful about what you can do to change your world.
Thank you. Yes, it's a good message. Thank you for being on the show today, Vernelle.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
So you can go to Vernelle's website and learn more about her. It's www.unitygoldenlife.org, unitygoldenlife.org.
Yes.
And then be sure to go to Woman of Wisdom, womanofwisdom.org. You can find all the events, you can read about all the presenters, and you can register. There are specials. We have an early bird special that goes through January 18th. We have special prices for teens, for young women up from 20 to 29, and for seniors. And it's a very reasonable, 3 days and 3 nights, very reasonably priced. So, and you can attend just even one day. You can do Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, or really immerse yourself and go the whole weekend. It's when you really benefit from all the amazing presenters that we have and the different topics. So yeah, check that out at womanofwisdom.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you.